want you to turn to, as we get started, we're going to be there in a moment, Proverbs chapter 5. We're going to read some there, and then Proverbs 7 and possibly Proverbs 6. And those sections in chapter 5 into 6 and 7 deal with the warnings to a young man against the immoral woman. The Old English has it strange woman because she's going against what would normally be considered proper behavior, proper thinking, and certainly proper actions. But we dealt with last week, just beginning the point when it comes to courtship, and the whole idea there is, how does it start? And I tried to excuse myself, if you didn't see the obvious attempt at excusing myself in that reading from the text in Proverbs 30, there are things too wonderful to understand, too complex, too over my head in thinking to be able to make an explanation. So if I wasn't obvious, I'm trying to be obvious now. That's my way out. I dare not even begin to say that I can properly explain the way of a man with a young lady, the way of a man with a maid, I think is how it is in the Old English. It's tricky. Attractions are tricky. And I wanted to not go into and explain it. Here's what ought to be attractions, and here's how people are attracted to one another, the symmetrical balance of the face. I'm trying to use any lingo I've ever heard in the past that seems ridiculous to me, but there we go. What makes a person good looking? Well, it's so much more than that. But so often, that's the first thing that catches our attention, is they look good. I can't speak from a female perspective, fortunately. I can just speak from a guy's perspective, and typically that is something that will catch his eye. Someone looks attractive. And I would imagine to some degree it's that way with young ladies. Maybe they can see past a guy that's not the best looking faster than a guy can see past a young lady who's not necessarily good looking. But I say it that way not to be funny, but to try to start the point that when it comes to attraction, it should be, how do we say it? Beauty is not, how do we say it's not skin deep, or it is skin deep, or I don't remember the statement there. It's what happens when I try to get wise and use one of those smart things. But there's more to attractiveness than our looks. And I hope so. And I think a relationship that's based off, well, I think that person's pretty good looking, handsome, pretty, attractive, whatever term is going to be used. And I'm not going to deny that's part of the initial process. But it needs to get past that quickly, I suppose, before the heart becomes wrongly engaged. And I would imagine many of us have heard of or have seen and maybe have been acquainted with someone that at first glance you think that's a sharp-looking person. And then when you start to get to know them, you realize they don't look so attractive anymore. They don't look so attractive anymore. Maybe it's because they're arrogant. Maybe it's because they're stingy. Maybe it's because they're bitter, or they're short-tempered, or they're ultra lazy. There's all kinds of things that can make us change our mind regarding somebody. So my point tonight is to try to stress that the beginning of the process will often involve, I think someone looks good. The term that was used often in junior high, I don't know if it's still used, just to try to show I have at least some peripheral experience with this. People would say, they're cute. The girls used to say that. Oh, he's such a cute guy. And the only reason I know this isn't because anybody called me cute. Not that I wasn't, but it was the number of girls that seemed to like my two older brothers. And that was a term they often used. Well, your brother there, he's cute. And of course, me, big deal. I don't think they're cute. I could tell you some things that change your mind, but It's just funny. It's awkward too, isn't it? When you talk about this, if you remember, some of us that are married, the first time you meet someone, and then you're trying to get through the, I find them attractive. They probably think I'm despicable, or they would never want. They would be offended if I even mentioned that I was interested, and things like that. So I kind of appreciate there's a bit of intimidation that comes with that. At least there used to be. And I think there was a positive side to that. I'm nervous what they'll think of me. I'm nervous, if they think of me at all. And so it would cause kind of an instinctive exploration as to finding out about this person and maybe hinting at it. Hopefully we're way past the whole grade school, junior high, do you like me, yes or no, signed anonymous. It's obviously not going anywhere when we get to that degree, and hopefully as we get older, we get past that and we try to say, okay, I find this person attractive. I would like to know a bit more about them. I would like to get to know more about them in a normal setting rather than, hey, let's just start going on dates. Even that sometimes I think has an awkward impact on a relationship rather than, in a group setting, you kind of watch people, you listen, you might even go on kind of an investigatory type exploration of asking people about someone, but then there's always the risk of being caught that, what, you like them? That horrifying situation that's there. So I understand, I'm just trying to demonstrate, I can empathize with the terror that comes with it, but there ought to be some thought given to this rather than, I think they're good looking, wow, let's just hurry up and get this thing moving here. Yes, Colleen? Oh, well, there we go. We've got a whole nother category that ought to be considered the cyber stalking. I've got to be careful about how that's done, but yeah, you can learn a lot. It's so much easier these days. Of course, most people put their best pictures and best explanations forward in social media. Yeah, that's understandable. So that's why it's nice to see them personally in group settings, see their families, because you can learn a lot about a person when you see them in their family setting. Now, that probably makes most nervous. It's one thing to have somebody like you and then to think, well, wait till they meet my family. I remember, I shouldn't remember too much, this just wastes so much time, but here we go. I remember when Tammy and I started to date, that's a term there, and I thought it was a very good start. I loved her heart and her spirit about things. Of course, I thought she was very good looking, so that didn't hurt. But I loved her spirit. I loved how she didn't know a stranger. She was enthusiastic about everything. She was funny. And I remember my family was coming up that fall for some reason. My dad may have been speaking or something like that. And I warned my family, because I know how we joke. And I said, be careful, some of the words that you use. And I'm not talking curse words. We weren't that way. It was just, we get so comfortable with each other. To this day, we're still this way. I don't want to say any more lest I offend. But we love to laugh. We love to pick on each other. And not just my immediate family, though that's firmly ingrained in our group, but in my extended family and just all over the place. So I warn them, be careful what you say. To this day, my older brother, Rick, if it comes to his mind, will laugh at me. See, I remember that warning, Don. She did better than any of us. She could keep up with all of us as far as this kidding around and some of these things. She wasn't offended at all, and it fit right in. But that whole getting to know our families and things like that, there's a whole bunch of stages that go into this relationship beginning, and I don't want any of them to be discredited, because you can learn a lot about a person with their family. Some of it might be negative, and sometimes it's not, wow, look how well they blend into a really good family and things we like. Sometimes it's, look how they contrast some of the family settings or things that they're in. It could be that, or just how we respond, and who their friends are, what they talk about. What does it seem like their goals are? And then you can really, if you're starting to, before you ever want to get serious, I wonder how they handle their money. I wonder if they're neat, if they're disciplined. I mean, will they be neatniks or will they be slobs? Things like that might have an impact on how we think. So in the notes, I was at point number 2, toward the bottom of the page, again, under point number 3, starting at the beginning, dealing with the initial attraction, which there is, and it is complex, and I don't think anybody can work it out to a perfect science. Again, I'm using Proverbs 30 for that. But, number 2, there is nothing initially wrong with physical attraction. This is where God has designed us to see certain things attractive. But I think we all know, if we're responsible, that sometimes we might think someone is more physically attractive than somebody else. But this somebody else starts to really become even more attractive because now I'm starting to get to know them. I think, I like that personality. I like their viewpoint on life. I like their optimism. I mean, it was one thing that certainly attracted me to Tammy was she just seemed to find the bright side to everything, and she just seemed constantly on a higher level of emotional than my kind of being down and kind of quiet and a little more self-conscious of things. And I know it's hard to believe that I was ever that way, but Tammy has helped balance me out, and I won't talk about me balancing her out at all. The only time I think I've ever referenced Song of Solomon is in these notes. The only time ever. And some of you know my struggles with doubts over the Song of Solomon is whether or not it belongs in the canon. Maybe I'll get kicked out of some church group sometime for my saying such a thing. But I did work it into here. Most of Song of Solomon illustrates this as one of the aspects of genuine attraction and affection. There is a lot of descriptions about how attractive this person was. Now, I do know, I have seen it, in case anyone's thinking of it, an artist rendition of what this woman would look like, and it was scary. They were probably a little too literal to some of the descriptions that were given there. But I think, obviously, we can realize that there's other things. I did put a few examples in here. Sarah is described as being very pretty, so much so it scared her husband even into her old years. He was nervous that she was so attractive someone else would find out that Abraham was her husband and they would kill him so they could have her as their wife. That's one of those references there in Genesis 12. Rebekah was described as being very attractive, very pretty. Esther was certainly someone who got to her position because of her good looks. I'm not saying necessarily that, wow, now there's the ideal way to get a man, but she was described that way, and it wasn't looked upon as being bad. God used that attractiveness. And I had to throw a guy in here somewhere. They're not often talked about as being good looking, but here we go. David was certainly described as being good looking. 1 Samuel 6:12, I think I mistyped that there, but 6:12, and he's even described that way in 1 Samuel 17:42, being a good-looking guy, which seemed there in 1 Samuel to be one of the points that, for whatever reason, bothered Goliath. That here's all the descriptions of David, and Goliath also seemed to realize that David was a good-looking guy, and that made him angry. I don't want to speculate, but it was certainly some of the things that are mentioned. So we understand that. There's nothing evil to say, well, if I find someone physically attractive, that's already wrong. Not necessarily the case. Now, there is a difference between attraction and lust. And oftentimes lust is always driven by getting. I want something for me. Love will find someone attractive, hopefully for the right reasons, and will have this uncanny desire to share of myself with them. Of course, it's crushing when they're not interested in our sharing, but still, that wanting to share of myself, sharing with them. This is why that friendship is so important, because that's at the heart of what love is. I just like being with the person, not just how they look, but I like being with that person so that I can even imagine, hopefully it's realistic and we've done some research and this is a proper imagination, that we'll grow old together and we'll be close friends all the way through, and we'll even be closer as we age and become more feeble. But it's always a sweet thing to see when you see an older couple that aren't putting on an act, but they really love each other. And it's not very common. It seems like you find a lot of older couples and, wow, they've weathered the storm through all these years of their marriage, but they're not that fond of each other. But it is so wonderful to see that and to think, maybe we could be that kind of couple, so that we'll be so close as we get into our older years and love each other and never fear the empty nest situation. I had a woman at work come to me, and I didn't know her, and she's new to the department. We were talking, and she just said, "Yeah, I'm about to be an empty nester." And in one of the points she mentioned, that was a point that, she's a little nervous about in being an empty nester, was that she and her husband were divorced. And that, they'd been divorced for some time, and so now this was not something to look forward to, and I understand that. But could we imagine that even if the kids weren't around and they all left and went on to their happy lives and everything like that, that we would love being with each other, and our lives would still be full and still be enjoyable, because we're still good friends. If anything, we're far greater friends, far more truly in what love is later in life, and our lives are the better for it. So that's at least a high-level goal that ought to be is in focus when we're starting to think about how this begins. I want to keep my eye on what I really think I want the end to be, not just imagining something, but truly looking for, these are my priorities. I want to marry someone that is my closest friend, and it will just keep growing, and we'll just love being with each other. And one more thing on that, I've seen couples often that will marry someone that they think their friends will be impressed with, and I'm not exaggerating this. It's startling to see. And then oftentimes right after they're married, not long after they're married, and the honeymoon's over, as people often say, and then she goes to spend times with her friends, and he goes to spend times with his friends, and everyone just thinks, that's just normal. That's just the way it ought to be. I don't doubt that they'll have friends. I'm not saying that you go off into the woods somewhere and build a cabin and never talk to anybody in civilization again. But you should be able to do that if it ever came down to it. But that you both are closest of friends. So it could start with the physical attraction. Point A, finding another physically attractive should not be considered evil. Though it could become so, could be evil, depending on the direction of the thoughts, where they go. Where they go. And again, just as a point of illustration, because I don't usually get to say these things, not that I want to say them a lot, but don't have opportunity to say a lot of these things often, and that is like a point of advice to young ladies. You want mainly a fella to be attracted to your face. I just don't know how else to say it. You just really want, if you're going to draw attention to yourself, try to draw attention to your face. Let that be the point of focus. And if a guy's point of focus is not there, that is not a compliment, and it's not something you would want to be around. That's just about as much as I want to delve into that point. Hopefully you understand it. Off to the left, maturity will be seen when either may see past outward good looks to a lack of character and discretion. That can be a sign of maturity. I really like how that person looks, but I'm seeing some things that are really discouraging to see. And sadly, we've got all these things reversed. We've got society's perspective. Okay, here's the good looks. That's why everybody is obsessed with how they look. They can't stop thinking, how do I look? How do I appear? And they're focused on not just their face, but their body, and everyone just focused on that. And then, when it comes to personality, we love people that are characters. It's not who they are, but they're a character. And they kind of take on these personas, and we like that. And everyone tries to take on these different personas because that's what everybody likes. No, we want to see as fast as possible beyond any facade that's out there. And what is this person really like? And I think sometimes it might end up being scary when you start to realize this person has no idea what and who they even are, because their goal in life is constantly working on being something else, some ideal image of a person that society seems to be putting forward. No, sooner or later, especially if the relationships progress and there is then a marriage, no matter what, you're going to get to know each other for real. So pretty nice to have a lot of that, especially the personality side, the goals side, the disciplines and the character side, all figured out before you get married. And you're okay with that. And you like it, and you're still strongly attracted. I know I haven't read the other text here, but I do have Proverbs 11:22. Not a pleasant verse necessarily. Some of the Proverbs are just very blunt, and here's one. As a ring of gold in a swine's snout, so is a beautiful woman who lacks discretion, who lacks true discerning discretion about life, priorities, right and wrong. A lot of that's wrapped up into the idea of discretion. She is very good looking, but she doesn't have discretion. And the psalm or the proverbist compares it to a pig, swine, with a really nice gold ring in its nose. That's not a compliment. I think we understand that that's the case. Better to see past the gold ring to the actual nature and character of the person. Many people have married good-looking people, fun people, only to discover they don't know who they married. And usually it's mutual. Goes the other way as well. And a lot of people get very serious and very sincere about working through their marriage. But sadly, it's on the other side of the marriage, and they're the only one working at it. Because then you got two people in the marriage, and if one is very serious and focused on it, and the other's determined not to, practically speaking, without God's divine intervention, it's not going to work out. Best time to deal with marriage issues is long before you get married, so that it's not going to be a problem after we're married. Point B, physical attraction is natural and God-given, but is often treated with suspicion because history demonstrates the tendency for it to become the sole focus. I just want them to look good. I feel bad for girls, young ladies, women in general, because of the strong stress in this area. Of course, you ought to try to look your best. There's nothing wrong with that. But to think that everything rests on it. I mean, look at the cosmetic surgery stuff, the other things that are out there. It's not uncommon how much work there goes into trying to maintain some type of certain image. Now, again, I don't think there's necessarily anything noble to then try to be as bad looking as you possibly can either. All of us should try to do the best we can with what we've got. And for some, that might be a little bit more work or whatever, but we try to just generally present ourselves that at least we care that other people have to look at us. There ought to be at least a little bit of concern there. But it's not the number one focus. I gave the illustrations there in point C with the Sarah, Rebecca, Esther, David, and their being good looking. Point D, this will often be the first point of attraction, though that is not always the case. It commonly is, but not always. Many could testify that there was not an initial physical attraction, but as each was able to get to know each other, an attraction formed in their personalities, their life outlook, and then the physical kind of became part of it. But I don't think that's totally unheard of, where people don't necessarily find each other initially attractive, but they start to get to know each other, and suddenly, surprise, there's a mutual attraction that kicks in there. That I think is, to some degree, better than just going and pursuing someone because you find them particularly physically attractive. What is their personality like? Now, again, can our personality impact certain things? Yeah, if you're a better person, odds are your face is going to be better. I mean, it can certainly communicate volumes, and we don't realize it because unless we're really, really vain and taking lots and lots of selfies, which is never a good sign, never, we don't look at what we look like. And by the way, that is, I don't think there's any hesitancy in saying that if you come across someone that is attractive and they know they're attractive, and their social media is full of constant profile update pictures, that might be, I don't think I'm stepping out on a limb here, that might be cause for concern. Just because I don't know exactly what positive thing that necessarily communicates, other than someone might be really struggling with how they appear and looking for compliments, or they just really like how they look. That might be a concern, though, if someone really likes how they look. Just saying. If a girl comes across a guy and he knows he's God's gift to women, you don't want to pursue him. And the same thing then with a woman that just knows she's just the most beautiful thing ever, and then loves to have guys all coming after her and pursuing her. That's not someone you want to pursue. A woman that would lead on guys just to lead on guys because she thinks it's kind of fun. I mean, who doesn't like to be liked? Who doesn't like to be admired? She's not someone you should pursue. She's actually more in common with the woman we're going to speak about here in just a moment in Proverbs. So point number 3, the whole term opposites attract is true, but can be misunderstood. I think generally speaking, there are a lot of qualities that we end up finding attractive in others because it's not us. It is different from us. I mean, who wants to marry someone like themselves? I never did. Again, if someone's really interested in marrying someone just like themselves, there's an issue there. Of course, we find other things about someone attractive, and part of that attractiveness is they're different. And we like that, and hopefully their differences are complementary. They complement us. They'll build me where I'm weak, and I could do the same with them, and we'll kind of make a good balance together in how we interact with others. So opposites attract is true, but can be misunderstood. There may be aspects of a person that are opposite that we do find attractive because they're different from us. That's not unheard of. I think that's probably where the phrase comes from. But some differences are not good. So basically, we desire there's the complementary differences. So much of what we find attractive stems from our upbringing. And I don't think I'm going too far out there, because if you look through history, there's a lot of times you'll find someone was written about as being pretty good looking, and then you see their picture and you think, maybe this was later in life. I don't think they were good looking. But there were different styles. I mean, it's hard to say these days because you can't predict styles, but if I had, like, on the whole Civil War sideburns or whatever, and some of the garb and things like that, it would be questionable. Or the colonial period, and I came in dressed like, somebody from that era, I'm sure people would start to have issues with these things. But in that time, there were things that you think, okay, that's good looking. There was different appearance things. Even weight was kind of judged differently. A really, really thin woman, I think Dan Carpenter brings this up periodically, but she wouldn't be necessarily looked upon as being very attractive, some years ago. So things can change. So a lot of this can stem to a great degree from our upbringing. One of the goals of a parent, or at least it should be, is to develop desires in their children for what is right, what is best. And this is often what, when they are old, they will not depart from it. There in Proverbs 22:6. Bring up a child in the ways you go. When he's old, he will not depart from it. How have we influenced our kids as to what to look for in a potential spouse? What do they find attractive? What do you like? And hopefully we foster some of that, so when they start to looking around, there's different things that other people might not find so attractive, but our children will think, no, actually I like that a lot. I find that attractive. Even if my friends don't think that they're necessarily the best looking or the most impressive person they've ever met, but there's something about that other person that I truly like, and hopefully it falls somewhere under the general category of godliness. True godliness, true Christ-likeness. Do you think Christ qualities and characteristics, just in his approach to life, his priorities, his character, would be that attractive to most women today? Likely not. Likely not. I mean, we might think of all the nice love statements that came up, but look at all the other things the Lord said. You might think, well, that's a little harsh there. He's a little too absolute on things. I want a guy that has a lot of gray areas, or, I don't want to have somebody that makes me feel convicted. I mean, if you think about enough of the things that actually bother us, you think, I think the problem's with me. These things shouldn't bother me, because if someone is demonstrating more and more genuine Christ-likeness, that should be attractive. And yet you're finding today that when people look at each other, it's something superficial, something society-wise it's considered great, but it's the antithesis to Christ-likeness. And think, why are people pursuing other people that aren't anything like what they ought to be pursuing? This is what's astounded me over the years, having started with youth many years back and then having seen many over the years. And they'll grow up in a solid setting in that they'll find something else attractive. And you got to think, well, what caused that? It doesn't mean that everything we do when they're children is going to totally set their ways. But what is it that controls this? Why do we think, well, I'm going to forsake the faith, or I'm going to go off and loosen all my standards, or loosen my theology, or loosen my whole concept of God for a young lady or for a guy? And that happens constantly. Constantly, where they'll, we love each other. Yeah, but what exactly do you love before you even step foot into that area? And you're treading on ground that people say no one should ever get into. Oh, that we had church families where we were a little bit more, involved in trying to encourage these types of things in one another. But typically, in my experience, the people that get picked on the most are the people that are trying to say, shouldn't we hold to a little bit more godly standard, Christ-likeness, in who we're looking for in a potential mate and who we're encouraging our young people for? I mean, some people be all thrilled because my daughter found a guy and he just has all these great credentials. And that would be the most important thing. Yeah, but where's he at God in his godliness? Now, he may not have good credentials because he's a lazy guy. Well, that's a whole other thing. But what is it that truly is capturing the attention of our young people? What do they think is attractive and why? It's one of the things I'm interested in. Even, I won't go into detail, but when my kids were younger and different ones would talk, some of them were more honest than others and, just telling me everything. And some would tell, I think so-and-so is attractive. And I would always ask the same thing, what do you find about them that's so attractive? What do you like? And it was interesting to hear their responses and what they would say. And typically, they're little kids. It's not, much. I won't even try to give an example, but it's not a lot. But every once in a while, you hear something and you think, okay, that's at least borderline where it ought to be. They were noticing the character of somebody else, something that was characteristic of them. I'm always very curious when a couple people find each other attractive. Why? And most of the time, it's just totally inappropriate to just start to pry. But when I get into premarital counseling and things like that, then I have permission to pry. What is it that brought you together? What is it you like about each other? And you daringly ask, what don't you like about each other? I won't tell you the answer I'm looking for there, but it is an interesting question to ask and to see the response. Some attractions reveal character issues that need to be addressed. I just, again, focused on surface type things. Point number C, top of page 5, we as parents or any other influencer of those that are younger, and even when they're children, this can be part of our influence. You think how often we say, look over there, isn't he a handsome young man, or isn't she a pretty girl? Don't overplay that, because then that seems to be what we're really pushing. When's the last time we looked at a kid and said, what an obedient young man? What a very responsible young lady. That is so impressive that you've done that. Look how nice you are to other people. Look how you shared your toy when everyone else was taking it away from you. Or look, that person wasn't nice to you, and yet you responded so nice, so kind back. I know some of you are probably thinking, I never see that. But we try, we look for those things. to complement the right things that we ought to complement in others. So we as parents or any other influencer need to be discerning of what some of these attractions may really be, or at least what they should be. If there is an attraction, for instance, and this is a drastic one, but you have to watch for it. If there is an attraction to rebellion of sorts, can rebellion be attractive? Absolutely. It's probably one of the most attractive things to children who are struggling with the parents God gave them and the family setting they're in. And they want to be free of something, and suddenly there's this, they don't call it rebellion, they won't even necessarily call it sin, but there's this freedom. They're standing against whatever system that they're under, and then suddenly, that is extremely attractive. So we look for that. What is it our kids do find attractive in someone else? And if you start to find out, what is it about this person that you like? And you can at least discern that maybe it's actually some type of rebellion. Just to give an example. Because rebellion typically has as its core, I'm my own boss. And I like people who they're their own boss. That doesn't work in relationships. They already can't do the math, right? But they don't think about that. I love someone who's their own boss, because I'm my own boss. Put two own bosses together, and what do you got? Someone's going to submit. Someone's going to yield, and if they don't, there'll be a constant back and forth. And it's not the iron sharpening iron. So a friend sharpens the countenance of his friend. It's not that. It's just a clashing after clashing, and every once in a while one will yield, and one's the boss, and sooner or later, oftentimes you'll find it where they're just giving up. They won't even fight. Won't even talk. Won't even discuss it. It's where so many of these other terms have come. You used to hear about when I was a kid, hen-pecked husbands. And you know, what was a hen-pecked husband? I remember hearing that as a boy, and I still have the same picture in my head. Some guy getting picked on by a chicken. But the picture was he just gives up in varying degrees. And vice versa. The woman just, why even try? The man is so lacking in his focus, and he's so undisciplined, it ends up demonstrating what his character is or isn't. So there can be even an attraction to rebellion of sorts, and this may lead to potentially dangerous consequences and influences. So what is it about someone that you like? This is a good thing for young people to be thinking through. I like them, but why? There's a lot of people that say, I really like so-and-so, and then you find out they don't even know them. They have no idea what they're like. Off to the left, many of the things that take place in our teenage and young adult years will impact the rest of our lives. It is interesting that we typically end up picking who we're going to live the rest of our lives with when we're the most generally immature. We're so young and we're making a lifelong decision. This is why young people, as much as you probably can become wearied of hearing it, you really, really, really want input and counsel, hopefully from parents. I understand sometimes it's not always going to be the best, but you really want it. So many people realize that it would have been at least wise to have that perspective, but they realize it long after they're already married. And I have heard this so many times. It is common. And I don't think my situation's exceptional. There's a lot of people that are married out there, but they're not happily married. And then no doubt they wish they could go back in time. Then you got the conflict, well, then my kids won't be around. What do I do about that? And then you think, well, what was the parent that says, great? That wouldn't be good either. Just what a situation we put ourselves into because we're so proud and arrogant and so driven for our own cause. We refuse to be people under authority, refuse to be people that will take counsel because we don't like the counsel, because we're impatient, or because we're proud and stubborn, and none of those work well stepping into a marriage. Even if we think we'll be the exception and can make it work. Point D, the warnings of a father to his son in Proverbs 7 are descriptive. They're in Proverbs 5, they're in Proverbs 6, and they are in Proverbs 7. But they're descriptive not just of an immoral person, but even of the process that leads to this type of immorality. There's some very interesting descriptive terms that are used of immoral people. And they're not just people that would stand on corners, prostitutes and the like. They're common. qualities. I did this study many years ago in Proverbs 7. I just wanted to work through and say, all right, if we just kind of take the characteristics of the strange woman, the immoral woman, and we just put them off to the side, what do they look like? And I think a lot of them would be offensive, even in our churches now, to speak against them. To speak against such a woman. For instance, and I'm about to tread on one that's real dangerous, but I'm not sure what to do with it, but here it is. One of the characteristics of the immoral woman, right out of Proverbs, her feet abide not in her home. What do you do with that? Well, that was cultural. It didn't fit anymore. Well, what did it mean? Why was that something characteristic of her? And I delved into that, and there's more to it. It doesn't mean she's a homebody, or not a homebody, but it's what it was one of the things that was used to demonstrate her character, in this case lack thereof, in the good sense. In the beginning of chapter 7, there is a strong instruction to keep or guard the words of counsel that are being given, and to then utilize this wisdom to be of good sense, and to be one given to looking beyond the immediate. It's so immature, but so typical of young people. They can't see very far beyond the immediate to the after effects, to the consequences of possible directions and decisions. Because again, when we get to the older perspective, we look back and we think, what was I thinking? How could I have missed that? And this is one of the issues or fallouts from dating. I dated, and then there was the perfect guy or the perfect girl, but I was looking for something else, and now I married this one, and that I chose that one. Then it's just never healthy. I can't imagine the number of people that will look back and think, if only I would have married so-and-so. That's just never good. Or, I hear we have a soulmate out there, and I missed mine. None of that is helpful and useful. None of it does. And yet people use it all the time. How can you say that? I know somewhere out there, I think I met my soulmate, and we didn't hit it off or whatever, and now we're all both married to somebody else. I've used this illustration before, but it does demonstrate, and this is kind of an interesting one because it happened somewhat publicly, how it came out, but how our natures are, and sometimes public demonstrations demonstrate what the underlying common natures of everybody around them. But a pastor that I knew real well took a church way south of here, I won't even say the city, but south of here, and one of the things that had happened in this church where they went through what they thought was a revival, and one of the responses to this revival is everyone just felt the need to stand up and confess their sins. I know we're supposed to confess our faults one to another. We'll get to that in James 5, but it wasn't this picture. And it was mentioned that, I think it was a song director, stood up and said, I have been wrong. I have been wrong. I have had lustful thoughts for this other woman. And that's just so wrong. He was honest. Apparently she didn't know about it. And suddenly she thought, I kind of like you too. And in the act of what they thought was just great revival, ended up in an open scandal. But we love each other. And anyone that would criticize that is just wrong. You hear this commonly even in our churches, but they love each other. And it seems to think or be treated as though it justifies so many things. No, the best time to be thinking through these things is long before we get married, trying to have some foresight as to what will come down the line. Even though it may be different down the line, we're trying the best we can. Often left there, much of the initial instruction is for the son to keep these commands nearby. We're about to read it. As constant reminders, and even as it begins, central to his focus, the term apple of your eye. Make it so everything you see, you're seeing it as though this counsel is always there. They're the lenses that you look at life with. We all look at life through some type of lens, and I'm not talking the physical lens in our eye, but something controls how I see things. Because you could take a few of us, see something, and we all have different opinions. And part of that is because we all look on it differently. And some of this could end up being far more than just opinion. it could be a demonstration of poor values, what we value and what we don't value. Proverbs 7. Let me read Proverbs 5. I'm going to read a lot here, and we'll build on some of this more next week. But when I was a young teenager, my dad did this with us fellows. He said, I'm going to take you out to eat. Yay, love that. Order anything you want. Hooray, it's great. But before we do, I want you to read and reread Proverbs 5, 6, and 7. We're going to talk about it. Great. Went to my room, opened it up, thought, oh no, I don't want this conversation. My dad did it so well, and was, how do I say it, a person that would stand alongside of us in the struggles that were to come, not a judge over us. And I learned more later that he had all the reason to be someone who would stand alongside in the fray, not someone standing off to the side condemning us in it. But here it is. Speaking now to a boy, a young man, thinking about his future and being so careful of the type of woman that could grab his attention. My son, give attention to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may observe discretion. You're able to discern things, read things, understand situations for what they are appropriately, and your lips may reserve knowledge, so that how you respond and what you say are insightful. For, here's the warning, the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and smoother than oil is her speech. She's going to sound really nice. There's going to be something about how she talks that's going to be extremely alluring. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Oh, it keeps getting worse, but she was so alluring. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lay hold of Sheol, the grave, hell as it's often translated. She does not ponder the path of life. She hasn't really thought well through how life should be lived. Her ways are unstable. She does not know it. She just lives by instinct. She's unstable, irresponsible, unfocused. She doesn't have discretion. So now then, my sons, listen to me, and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house. Don't go anywhere near this type of person. Lest you give your vigor to others, your strength. You give your strength to others and your years to the cruel one, lest strangers be filled with your strength and your hard-earned goods go to the house of an alien. And you groan at your latter end when your flesh and your body are consumed, and you say, how I have hated instruction, and my heart spurned reproof. That's an accurate assessment. It's just so late. Better to deal with it now. No, I'm going to appreciate and look for instruction and take reproof. It's hard to find young people that will come anywhere near this. How dare you tell me what I should do or shouldn't do? They stand against any type of reproof. That's a very bad sign. And this man that fell into it didn't listen to counsel. And this father, look what a picture this father's giving. Imagine that. We're going to talk about dating. Yes, great. You're going to find the woman of your dreams. You're going to be so happy and just have a happy household and have the American dream and just things will work out well and we'll visit each other and you'll have a house and it'll be beautiful and it's just all these pictures. No. Look what this dad does. Watch out for this type of woman. Oh, she's going to be very alluring. You're going to find her attractive. But when you start to fall prey to her, you'll be devastated. And notice, it doesn't necessarily mean he marries her. This is the danger of any types of these things. Even pornography is this way because of what it ends up doing. Pulls you into it, leads you into it. You feel ensnared by it, and it robs you of your resources, not just financially, but of your mental resources. In other texts, it talks about how it destroys the soul, your person, your thinking. And it's so easy to get to these days. That's why it's going to be harder and harder to find a guy that's truly not yielded in this area, and how it will distort and warp his whole idea of what his wife would be, should be, and things like that. He goes on after saying, and you say, verse 12, how I've hated instruction and my heart spurned reproof. You don't want to be characterized like that. And I have not listened to the voice of my teachers, nor inclined my ear to my instructors. I was almost in utter ruin in the midst of the assembly and congregation. It's the point there of almost being in ruin. Look at the counsel that's given, though, now from this father. Drink water from your own cistern, fresh water from your own well. Because you get into a bad marriage, you get into a situation you're not happy, or you might even be in a fairly decent marriage, but then your mind and your heart starts to wonder, the guy or the girl. Maybe I could find another guy. Maybe I could find another girl. And we start to explore, and then people start to say, oh, maybe you shouldn't. I just want to be happy. And now that's like the ultimate crippling statement that you can give people in churches. I don't dare go there. Because I don't ever want to be characterized as someone who would ever be known to be someone who stops someone else from being happy. They just want to be happy. And yet, we should know better. I know we won't make a lot of friends as we move on, but we don't have to be hypercritical or cruel. But we must not be intimidated by such concepts, such counterpoints as, oh, well, they want to be happy. They want to be fulfilled, and they're in a unfulfilling marriage. Their lives are empty. Yeah, but you've missed the whole point. You're in a marriage. Marriage is God's institution. And therefore, we start with that, God's institution, and we've got to start focusing somewhere, sooner or later, better sooner, before you make any drastic decisions, on God's grace. And we act as though, I know I've certainly seen it and have had other people just become furious, even when you start to try to humbly, cautiously introduce the concept that God's grace is enough. And it's like you've just cursed them out. And the anger that comes when you even go there, is not God's grace enough? Maybe for someone else, but not for me. You don't know what I've been. You don't know the disappointment I have. You don't know how unfulfilled and how sad I am. Yes, but we need, no matter what, before God, to be focused upon His grace in these things. Should your springs be dispersed abroad, streams of water in the streets, let them be yours alone, and not for a stranger with you. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth. Rejoice with her. Keep your focus on her. Rejoice with her. You don't want to share any of your affection, anything of yourself, with another woman in this case. You share only with her. She's the one that you keep your focus on. And again, people could say, well, if you knew my wife, yeah, but I'm sorry. I don't care who you marry. They're going to have flaws. They're going to have issues. And even if, what's interesting about flaws is sometimes they're not even flaws. Sometimes they're strengths, but they bother me because I'm the one with the flaws. We just don't think that way anymore. We just think, well, that bothers me. Sorry, that won't hold up in court. That's not necessarily an accurate assessment of anything, so it bothers you. That's not enough reason to start condemning the whole thing. Rejoice in the wife of your youth, the end of verse 18. Verse 19, as a loving hind and a graceful doe, let her breasts satisfy you all times. Be exhilarated always with her love. Interesting how even in the Proverbs it deals then with the physical. Speaking to a guy, to a man, your focus is on her. You're taken with her. And again, guys that think, well, I'm not satisfied for whatever reason, then what exactly is changing your perspective? What's changing your perspective? I've got some things I often try to share in marital counseling to try to deal with this particular issue as to what you find attractive. And so much of it is just, it becomes so superficial, so self-focused. And there's so many other things that can certainly fit this idea of being exhilarated always with her love. That it's truly exhilarating, and in the full sense of the term, that is certainly the case and ought to be the case. Not something impure or something just terrible. Of course, it's not. It's very personal. But as though something, it just can't happen, because only young people would ever be characterized that way. So it goes on, for why should you, my son, be exhilarated with an adulteress and embrace the bosom of a foreigner, someone who's not in your marriage, in other words? For the ways of a man are before the eyes of the Lord, and he watches all his paths. This is now the fear of God that the Father is pointing his Son to. God sees it all. He won't be mocked. You'll never trick God. You might trick other people, but you won't trick him. His own iniquities will capture the wicked, and he will be held with the cords of his sin. He will die for lack of instruction, and in the greatness of his folly he will go astray. What a statement that's given to this son. Chapter 6 deals with some of this, and I'll begin probably with chapter 7 next week as detailed instruction in a detailed example of what to beware of with the immoral woman. Why go there? Why am I dealing with this at this point in a courtship study? Because we're dealing with the whole concept of attraction. Just because I find something attractive doesn't mean it should be attractive to me. Something has to, outside myself, judge it. And I'm talking of obviously way more than the physical, far more than the physical appearance. Young people, good thing to think about. When you think of potentially ever getting married, can you think past a face, a look, and can you think of a character? The character of a person. What would be attractive to you? And some might think, well, I don't know. I mean, if I set my standard too high, I may never find another person. I wish that didn't come up as much as it does. That you might set your standard too high. Say that all you want. I'm not going to lower the standard to just, even things out, to be more fair. As I've said before, if ever there's a time to be strict, even hard at times, ultra cautious, with high standards, it ought to be in the pursuit of marriage. So that's why now's the time to be critical. Can someone be hypercritical? Yes, and then at least you'll know you shouldn't be married to them. But should there be a caution and a criticism? Yes, and that's why I want to pick up then next week then with the fabulous example of the tactics and allurements of this immoral woman, an immoral person, and how oftentimes we can become so used to these things that we don't realize that that's what they are. But you break them down in Proverbs 7 and you start to realize, okay, a lot of these things are even more common. They're more common in how people think and act, even in our churches. And then that becomes a point of attraction. And we keep it in a church. We do a church ceremony. They keep, nominal Christianity to some degree. And everyone looks on and says, well, that's pretty good. That's what we're looking for. As I like to stress, when it comes to looking for a potential spouse, someone that would marry our children, I think the word that ought to be utilized a lot more is the term exceptional. Way above average. And I don't mean in their grades, that might not hurt. And, whatever they're doing as far as in their work or whatever, but I mean especially top priority, their godly aspirations, their sensitivity toward God, where they're headed. I understand that you can't look at someone and say, well, I don't like where you're at now. So much of spirituality is truly to be defined in where someone is genuinely headed, where they are genuinely headed. And that's what you're trying to look for, young people. And put another prospect. How can I tell if someone's genuinely headed for that? And they may not be the most popular person in the group. And they may not be the person everyone just looks on as the ideal guy or the ideal girl. But we're not looking for what other people think. We're looking for what they are before God. And hopefully we as parents hope to lend to this process. And then when we get to grandchildren, we're not just to overcome with sentimentality and romanticism that we just hope they just marry anybody. Or just get married. We don't ever want to be guilty of something like that. We want our children to be discreet, and if they live the rest of their lives unmarried, that they will be fulfilled and content in their walk with God, because that's the one that's eternal. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for these warnings that are given, even being able to discuss these things in this topic, that you allow us to then consider the value of your institution and why we should treat it with such caution and be so careful walking up to it in the person we are, and certainly, hopefully, because of the way our society is now, in what we find attractive. Please work in the hearts of all of us, especially our young people, to be able to develop correct, well-discerned, discreet attractions, so that what they find attractive is what they ought to find attractive. And we all then be the better because of such a relationship. This we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.